Good morning and welcome to Veterans Heartbeat on the Pulse of the Veteran, where we discuss issues of health, happiness, opportunity, and well-being of interest to the veteran community, their families, and the community who honors them.
Good morning and welcome to another episode of Veterans Heartbeat, brought to you by River, the Rural Institute for Veterans Education and Research. My name is Jason Zentgraf. My co-host Ed Lasofsky is here with me, and he is the Executive Director of River. We welcome you to a weekly wide-ranging discussion of issues, events, opportunities, and needs in our veteran community. Morning, Ed. How you doing?
Morning, Jason.
We'd also like to thank our other sponsor, The Man Shop. It's a great place for a guy to get a haircut, so if you do need a haircut, swing on by and check them out. The gals there do a fantastic job. As said before, we are also sponsored by River, who offers many services to veterans, such as a weekly free vestibular disorder testing and educational programs that focus on veterans helping veterans.
Well, this morning we brought Fez in. Fez has a master's in exercise physiology, and our guest speaker this morning is Dr. Mark Gordon, and we're going to be talking about hormones and traumatic brain injury. So, Fez, you want to give a little bit of background on what you've been working on at the Institute and vestibular disorders?
Sure. So, aside from teaching Tuesdays and Thursdays, I've been spending my free time reading, which is fantastic. But mostly about vestibular disorders, which are a physiological problem where your inner ear has some type of disruption, and that ultimately causes anxiety, which is really not good. And unfortunately, lots of veterans and people that are in professions with, with large levels of volumes or some type of impact end up being treated for post-traumatic stress disorder or some type of depression when they actually have a physiological problem from their vestibular dysfunctioning.
Good morning, Dr. Gordon. So you've been working with a bunch of veterans with TBI, and you're doing some amazing, groundbreaking therapies. Can you give us a little of your background and what you're doing with the veterans population?
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be here to share with everybody out there listening what we've been doing. My humble background started in family medicine and family practice, which I got into when my father died of bone cancer. So I was on a new mission in life, which was to try and help people who seem not to be able to be helped by the traditional medical models. So having finished my residency in Chicago at Rush Presbyterian St. Luke's, I came back to California and fell into this area of anti-aging medicine, which is about hormone replenishment. In the course of dealing with hormone replenishment, I found that people who had psychiatric or psychological problems who were on hormone replacement got better. And then in reading an article in 2004 on traumatic brain injury produced or precipitated growth hormone deficiency, it was my aha moment where I said, okay, head trauma leads to hormone deficiency. Hormone deficiency causes changes in personality. So what I started doing was reaching out to NFL and reaching out to people who had sustained a head trauma from a motor vehicle accident. And then I get a phone call from a military doctor and or a doc who was married to a military, the active military, and he was getting ready to be less than honorably discharged because of personality issues. So I sent her a kit, and we did his laboratory testing, and lo and behold, he was deficient in a number of the hormones that we check, and we replenished them through either natural or prescribed medication, real medication, and he got better. And he ended up staying in his position in the Green Beret for about 2 more tours. So that's where my background came from relative to the hormones in endocrinology, and what I do now is neuroendocrinology, which is addressing the hormones that are produced by the brain or the deficiencies of these hormones precipitated by traumas like blast trauma, IEDs, repetitive gunfire, standing next to a tank that's discharging its shells, blasts, percussive waves, and so forth. And that's where I came from.
Okay, now you mentioned the testing. I know there's some really interesting controversy over testing because every lab has different results. Is that correct?
Yeah, labs, technology that's used in laboratory can alter the results. Some of the older technology that we have, like radioimmunoassay, RIA, tends to give us artificially elevated results, so you think the person is normal and therefore you don't check them. But using some of our newer technology called mass spectroscopy, we get an accurate, very, very specific results. If you're going after estradiol, you only get estradiol. You don't get all the other forms of estrogens. So laboratory technology is important.
So once an individual, and we work with a lot of individuals with post-traumatic stress, and we're finding a lot of these guys have physiological conditions that can be actually treated instead of a mental condition. So if an individual out there that is listening to this, how do they know if it's a TBI versus PTSD?
Well, it's a great question that you ask. Number one is I don't believe in PTSD. I believe that PTSD is a continuum from failed diagnosis and treatment of TBI. If you go back to the people who have PTSD and you ask them if they've been exposed to any physical trauma, you'll see that the majority of cases say yes, or if not all, they say yes. So PTSD is the psychiatric aspects that develop when you have traumatic brain injury. In traumatic brain injury, what we're seeing is that inflammation to the brain alters the chemistry in the brain. So what happens is the control mechanisms, the interactions between the different lobes that say, okay, you're going to say hello to this person instead of beating them over the head. Or you're going to make decisions, the right decisions or the most socially acceptable decisions over ones that are just random thoughts in your brain. Or else interpretation of things. Someone says to you, hi, and you scream because you thought they said something else. So the different areas of the brain help us with interpretation of our external world to our internal world so we can respond back to the external world. So hormones are extremely important. PTSD is just one of the syndromes that is representative of the inflammation and the hormonal deficiency. So I don't go after treating PTSD in the 1,400 civilians and the 200 veterans that we've treated in the past few years, that those with psychiatric problems or labeled as having psychiatric problems and on a multitude of medications are off their medications, back finishing up school, back reestablishing the families they lost, talking to their children they haven't spoken to for a long time. And this is always wonderful to hear.
So, okay, these hormones and, more importantly, testosterone, the VA up here has been prescribing to some of the veterans just testosterone and sometimes growth hormone. Is there side effects to these? And how do you mitigate those?
Well, the number one side effect of giving anyone testosterone is that within 4 to 6 months, it shuts off some major brain hormones, because in using testosterone, you shut off a stimulating hormone in the brain called luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone, LH, causes an increase in pregnenolone and DHEA and about 11 other hormones that regulate brain function. So a lot of times what I've seen in the past is that people who come to me who are on testosterone therapy, who in 4 to 6 months go back to their doc and say, hey, I felt really good at the beginning of treatment. Now I don't feel as well. And so what does the doc do? Increases the dosing of testosterone. But it's really not the testosterone-related issue. It's the fact that testosterone has shut off pregnenolone, DHEA, allopregnanolone, progesterone, cortisol, and all these 11 very important hormones in the brain. So when testosterone is used correctly in the right milieu, we don't see any side effects. We haven't I've been doing this 31 years, and I don't see the side effects. Now, with growth hormone, well, let's back up with testosterone. They say testosterone will increase the risk of prostate cancer. Doesn't happen. A great book called Testosterone for Life that was produced by Dr. Abraham Morgenthaler out of Harvard. He's a urologist. Spent the past 20 years or so, if not longer, looking at the science, and it turns out where they can't prove that testosterone causes prostate cancer because it doesn't. So that's with testosterone. Moving on to growth hormone, same venue. They say that growth hormone, because it's a stimulating for cell mitosis, for a replacement of cells, that it can increase the risk of cancer. Well, if you look at studies that have been done, there was one just recently where they showed that in children who were put on growth hormone, they had no greater occurrence of cancer. These are children with short stature or had Laron syndrome or a syndrome that led to deficiency of growth hormone, that when they were put on long-term replacement, it didn't increase their statistical risk for cancer. But the benefits of growth hormone are incredible. Growth hormone for me is the primary hormone, but not the only hormone, but the primary hormone that regulates testosterone, vitamin D, thyroid hormone, cellular repair, protein synthesis, all these positive things that help our body to stay efficient, youthful, if you will, to stay efficient at functioning. And growth hormone does stimulate a cancer protection product called BP3, IGF-BP3, binding protein 3, which in a study called the Melbourne study actually showed that it reduced cancer. So when you use growth hormone, it increases this thing called binding protein 3, which has an anti-cancer effect. So where is the cancer? I mean, where is the cancer? They just base it upon the fact that it increases cell replication and the possibility that genetic abnormality or a DNA crossover can occur leading to cancer. So we don't see it. But to reiterate, testosterone, when used appropriately in the dosing that you need, males produce between 4 and 10 milligrams a day, 25 to 35-year-old male. So anybody who's out there getting large doses of testosterone, that's the problem. You don't need to have large doses. You need to have doses, physiologic doses, and you have to make sure you have pregnenolone and DHEA on board also. Growth hormone, before using injectable growth hormone, we tend to use a secretagogue. Secretagogue is a natural product that stimulates our own body to produce more of its own growth hormone. A product called dinotropin is what we use. Another product called secretropin, which are all available through physicians or else online. But the benefit is that they actually have found 7 pathways that increase the production of growth hormone, and the majority of them are natural products like vitamin D increases growth hormone, DHEA increases growth hormone, testosterone increases it, arginine increases it, a group of amino acids increase it, and that's what these products have been built on, is a technology of natural means of increasing the production of growth hormone. So, and that we use for 3 to 6 months before we determine whether or not they need to go on injectable. And the majority of people don't need injectable growth hormone, which is, $1,000, $1,200 a month versus dinotropin, which is like $40 a month. And you get raises or, increases in growth hormone levels between 20 to 600% increase in about 89% of the people. In 11% of the people, it fails because these people have had significant damage to the regulatory mechanism of the brain, either the hypothalamus or the pituitary gland, and therefore using a secretagogue that is based upon some degree of normal functioning between the pituitary and the hypothalamus. So they're safe products, again, when used correctly.
How often is somebody's blood level supposed to be checked when they're on these products?
Well, great question. In the beginning, we do a comprehensive laboratory test, and then we start on treatment. And then the first follow-up is usually done at 3 months. And then the second follow-up is done at 6 months after the first test, and then 12 months, the anniversary, we do another one. And then if everything is aligned, they're doing well, they're feeling great, then we go to either every 6 months or every year of blood testing to monitor them. And then what happens during the time that we're not doing the blood testing and face-to-face monitoring is each patient fills out on a monthly basis a form called the MPQ, which is a monthly protocol or program questionnaire, which allows the client, the patient, to give us feedback on a every 30-day basis of how well they're doing. And what we see and what we've posted on our website is these people, going from zero, where everybody starts at a zero, going up to 30%, 50%, 80%, 100% better. And you spoke before this show about Green Beret, retired Green Beret, medically retired Green Beret, Andrew Marr. Andrew Marr was at a -10, and now he's at a +10, and being on the protocol. He's been on protocol for about 2 years. So we see it. People who have had horrific, traumas, whether or not it was in the military or in the civilian population, where they improve.
Now, this is a real special area within. It's a subset of medicine. I mean, it's real specialized. Is that one of the reasons that we don't see a lot of this in the VA system?
Well, the reason why you don't see it in the VA is because the traditional nature of medicine is that everybody does the traditional. Traditional is what the majority of people are doing. When you have people on the fringe like me doing things like this, it takes a while to get it into mainstream. But in doing this for specifically on traumatic brain injury and hormones, neurosteroids, and neuroactive steroids and traumatic brain injury since 2004, we're finally, 13 years later, starting to get the interest of the Navy, the Army, and we have some people in the Pentagon. And they're starting to look at our results. And I just presented in Virginia to a group our results of 58, a subpopulation of our veterans, where in this 58, their average suicide was 1 to 6. The range was 1 to 6. The average was 2. They were on between 3 and 16 medications. Within 3 months of being on our program, 91% achieved a 50% improvement. And 91% improvement, 90% of them were off their medication.
So there is some hope out there, and it is coming.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there is some hope, and, the hope from my standpoint is that someone higher up in the administration that we haven't reached yet will take an honest look at what we've done and what our results are. And so far to date, I've trained a little more than 300 physicians in our protocol. Over the years, I've trained almost 14,000 doctors in interventional endocrinology, which is the term I use instead of anti-aging medicine, but it's hormone replacement therapy. And there's a optimal way of doing it, and then there's a common way of doing it. We try to optimize everything that we do.
So, lots of benefits here. Here at the Institute, we've been studying the vestibular disorders. And we found a study from the VA where there was an 81% correlation between vestibular disorders and PTSD. So, yeah, it is really coming up with, there is a physical...
You look at, on the PTSD issue, if you would draw a couple of blood tests, like tumor necrosis factor or interleukin-6, C-reactive protein, and you monitor people based on their inflammatory parameters, that you'll see that, the ones with PTSD have a high inflammatory marker, and when you correct the inflammation, they get better. There are articles coming out in the traditional medicine talking about using tumor necrosis factor blocking agents, which end up improving CTE and Alzheimer's disease. CTE, the chronic traumatic encephalopathy from boxers and football players and so forth, these are inflammatory diseases. And now they're starting to acknowledge the fact that, wait a second, maybe inflammation is the key component here. If you look at Alzheimer's, there was a recent article about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. There being autoimmune antibodies and it being a inflammatory process. So I think when they get out of this rut that they're in and this one thought that, PTSD, give them antidepressants, PTSD, give them, narcotics and everything. And that's another interesting thing that's come up in our past 13 years, is that a lot of the people who are on, a lot of the vets who are on a multitude of narcotics, opioids, they got off of them rapidly without withdrawal, which caused me to say, what's going on? And the literature talks about the opioid mu receptor, alpha and beta opioid receptors, and the fact that things like testosterone, pregnenolone, DHEA do influence their response. And then we've got articles talking about, maybe the antidepressants that we manufacture are simulating some of the hormones in our brain, and the one that they're looking at is allopregnanolone, which comes from pregnenolone, which comes from cholesterol, as being a factor that can help stabilize brain functioning, which brings up the issue of all the medications that are used, called statin drugs, to block cholesterol. If you block cholesterol, aren't you doing the same thing that inflammation does in the brain, shuts down the production of the brain hormones? So I've had patients who have come in who are just as bad or in the same condition status as some of our blast trauma veterans who have never had any trauma, but they have all the symptomatology. They were called PTSD. They can't find the cause for it. And it turns out their statin drugs have shut down their entire hormonal cascade, because the majority of our hormones come out of cholesterol, just like vitamin D does, CoQ10, testosterone, estradiol, progesterone, DHT. They all come from cholesterol.
Yeah, well, it's unfortunate that our current healthcare system, we find somebody who has PTSD or X, Y, and Z, and we push these pharmaceuticals on them. I mean, just talking about SSRIs, 40% of people respond to SSRIs, but 30% of people respond to a placebo. So how is that more effective than this hormone therapy that you guys are seeing tremendous numbers with? It's this new wave that I think is coming. But unfortunately, most people don't like change. So hopefully we'll be able to turn this around and get some of this treatment that you're offering to the people that need it.
One of the other issues is Dr. Bart Billings. I know you're aware of his work.
Sure.
And he's a psychologist that we will have as a guest coming up. And
he's great.
He's said the same thing that you're saying. And
I was introduced to Dr. Billings, and we had a conversation, and when we were talking, it was like I was talking to myself, and he was talking to himself. That's how close we were. He is, ahead of the curve. He was ahead of me on this. Being in the military as a military psychologist, PhD, he got to experience it, and he saw there was no benefits. And also, there's a congressional committee or a military committee which is looking at the deleterious effects of pharmaceutical medication in terms of the high occurrence of suicide in active military as well as veterans. So they finally have recognized that there is an association. The more medication, the greater the number of suicide cases. I mean, you look at the PDR, which is a physician's desk reference, and you look at every one of the commonly prescribed antidepressant medications, regardless if they're a tricyclic or a SSRI or whatever. You look at it, and their first warning is when you start taking the drug, it can increase your depression and therefore increase your suicide ideation and committing suicide. And then they talk next about damage to the liver, the kidneys, the heart, the brain, and this, that, and the other. So, you have to be safe in what you choose and how you use it. And another issue is when you have a patient who has classical depression and you put them onto an antidepressant and it doesn't work, you put them on two and they're still depressed, you start rotating around 5 or 6 different antidepressants and it's not working. That's called atypical depression. An article came out a couple of years ago talking about 61% of the people with atypical depression were found to be growth hormone deficient. And when you replenish the growth hormone, in 1 to 2 months, the depression went away. Some of the classical findings in atypical depression due to growth hormone deficiency is problems with sleep, insomnia, problems with mood, social isolation, depression, bodily related issues, body somatization, where body injuries. And that's all from growth hormone.
The thing that we've got to tackle here in Montana is we have a veteran completing suicide at the rate of 1 every 36 hours. We've got to do something. And
yes,
we have a credentialed clinic with the VA, and we see a lot of veterans up here, and getting this technology is this is what we need.
Well, someone needs to make a commitment to, funding us. We just got finished with a new package so that we've, in fact, reduced the cost by about 33%, renegotiating a couple of our contracts. And so for less than $1,000, we can have an individual walk into one of our clinics, get his blood drawn or her blood drawn, sent to the lab in Jupiter, Florida, get the results back, interpretation of results with a report, and then a 45-minute to an hour phone conversation, in-office conversation, or Skype conversation to review the lab results and to talk about, okay, here's what you need to get on. Here's what we need to start you on. And it turns out that 80% of our treatment protocols are natural products, 20%, 15 to 20% are real prescribed medication, and we don't use any antidepressants. We don't use any, psychotropic medications, mind-altering drugs.
So, Dr. Gordon, just for sake of ease, can PAs do this, or is it only MDs?
PAs can do it.
That's fantastic.
In our class, we've now trained about a dozen naturopathic doctors. We've trained 2 chiropractors. We've trained about 8 psychiatrists. We've got 2 doctors we've trained in Montana. And let's see, PAs, we've got 3 PAs, and 3 or 4 PAs, and then we have a Masters of Nutrition. Masters, a woman in New York, Dina, who came to the class, and I was saying, geez, you're a nutrition. She says she loves the hormone theories. So she was there, and she represents us in New York with a doctor that works with her. So we want primary care, all the primary cares, whether or not it's nurse practitioners or physician assistants or naturopathic. We love it. Family practice, great. The key is having a good background in hormone therapy. We find that the ones who are quick adapters are those doctors that are already doing hormone replenishment, HRT, hormone replacement therapy, or TRT, testosterone replacement therapy. These are the ones who adapt much faster than getting a doc who hasn't a clue about hormones, and then you have to go through the hormone hurdle, and then you've got to go through the neuroendocrinology hurdle with them, and it's very difficult. So that's why we've only had about 300 doctors in the past 2 years that we've trained. I'm going November 1st to Tucson, Arizona, to train another group of doctors. I work along with an organization called Age Management Medical Group. They've been the host and sponsor for our programs for education on traumatic brain injury and veterans. They've been great. They help to bring in military for free to the class, and that's where we've been training. So we've had 2 this year, and hopefully next year we'll have 1 every quarter.
And when it comes to this training, how long does it take?
Well, the training is a full day. They take the full day class. They read the book, they watch the video, and then they take an exam. And they take an exam, and if they pass the exam, they'll be invited to present 2 cases to us. And they present 2 cases to us, and they do well. That's it. They'll be certified by us. And they'll be placed on our website as physicians who have gone through the program. If you go to our website, www.tbimedlegal.com, and you look at the physician network, you'll see some of the doctors. We had about a dozen docs come down from Canada to get trained, because there's a lot of TBI and PTSD, if you will, in Canada, and no one's doing anything. But I've been up there at the University of Toronto and lectured some years ago on this topic of traumatic brain injury and hormonal dysfunction syndrome. And so they've been coming down here. Hopefully next year I'll go up there and train a group. So that's basically it.
Sounds like really exciting stuff, Dr. Gordon.
The results are phenomenal, you know. I've got a couple of guys who walked out his University of South Texas MBA. He's on a program for 2 months. He's back in. He finishes his MBA and starts a phone company focusing on veterans as members of a phone company, so that he can give them preferential. He's in Texas. And another guy who's running Goldman Sachs in the United States, a division of it, who finished MIT and Harvard. Well, and on our protocol, and he just sent me a relative of his who's a district attorney, assistant district attorney at a major city, and started on treatment. So, you know, the benefits of what we're doing are known, are experienced, but the distribution of that information is the reason why I'm here with you today, and the reason why I go on the programs I go to, try to get more public awareness, and that's really where the linchpin is, in getting more people knowledgeable on what we are doing and the results that we are achieving.
Well, we do have plans on folding your program into the River Clinic, so that is great. And we'll be talking to you offline more about that. If there's anything else you want to add real quick, otherwise our time is over, and we sure appreciate you coming on board.
Thanks, I appreciate it. The only thing in closing is that the work that I do in the funds that are generated, as you know, we donate to Warrior Angel Foundation with Andrew Marr and his brother Adam. You know the story of Andrew being Green Beret and having been medically discharged because of too many blast traumas, and the fact that he was on 13 medications, full-blown alcoholic, and then within 4 weeks, he's off everything. And he's, you know, doing phenomenally well.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Gordon, for coming on our show. We really appreciate it, and keep up all the great work you're doing for the veterans out there. It's, you know, God knows it's needed.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for the time here.
Well, we really appreciate Dr. Mark Gordon for coming on Veterans Heartbeat. He's an incredibly talented and brilliant individual. He's doing amazing things for veterans out there, and his specialty in neuroendocrinology. So we're looking forward to working with him hopefully in the future, and working with him more. So thank you for listening to Veterans Heartbeat. We'd not be able to bring it to you without all the support of the listeners. Thank you again to the Man Shop for sponsoring the show. If you are in need of a haircut, swing on by and get a snip. Also, thank you to our main sponsor, River, the Rural Institute for Veterans Education and Research. They have an array of services such as veterans-focused education, a free vestibular disorder clinic, and many more services. Check them out on Facebook or on the web at riverofchange.org. Lastly, we would like to show our appreciation to all the veterans out there. Thank you for serving our country and keeping us safe.